we'll start with a prayer of gratitude. What is energy healing in a nutshell? Then a recap from yesterday. Then we'll continue on in today's session. And we have enough questions and enough threads that we started in on yesterday that I'd like to pick up and bring some resolution and completion to those. So we may actually start in by addressing a few of the questions. Anyway, it's great to have everybody here. I'm so happy to be with you all, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be the voice of our group. As part of the, I'll do the prayer first, then we'll go into what's energy healing. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being this live healing webinar, for being all of us, all of our ancestors, the blessing of the amazing physical bodies that we get to inhabit. Thank you for the ability to move with grace through the process of energy healing, to work efficiently and profoundly and concisely. We want to really uncover today that process by which the seeds of imbalance are revealed and addressed and transformed in an evolutionary manner. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom for being the bridge between the source of creation and the manifest field of creation. With all gratitude, thank you. All right. Oh, yes, everybody raised hands. Good to have you all with me. All right, so what is energy healing in a nutshell? Energy healing is focusing our attention in an intelligent and, yeah, that's a little better, right? An intelligent and precise manner in order to address the seed of imbalance and illness, which is almost always, we can find the seed of the symptom somewhere in the deeper, more subtle levels of the field of consciousness. And then to utilize the natural tendency, the natural spontaneous ability of consciousness to bring completion or fulfillment or wholeness to wherever it goes. And so, utilizing that natural spontaneous ability, we're able to create transformation in that seed of illness and bring about the change that allows the superficial level of self to reflect wholeness again, to reflect completion again, to reflect the divine. And essentially what we're doing is, in energy healing, bit by bit, we're basically restructuring ourselves as an expression of perfectly, beautifully expressed divine being. We're expressing ourselves as divine being. We're transforming piece by piece from being in a more kind of base or like a non-aware level of self to being fully present and fully, I would say, unfettered by the boundaries and limitations that stop divinity from making its way to the surface. Okay, so that's energy healing in a nutshell. My job is to, 3 hands went up at the same time. That's so cool. My job is to be the voice of this process, and I'm not doing it. The source of creation is doing it, but I'm doing my best to describe what happens, because the bringing it out in words stabilizes and integrates and helps to knit our group together so that we're all appreciating what we're experiencing. My words only express my perspective, but each of you has a perspective. So we're putting our perspectives together, and in so doing, we're creating a very deep field perspective on what's happening. And we need a really deep field perspective because this is abstract stuff. However, we absolutely have to understand and master it. Otherwise, our whole world is going to continue being riddled with problems and illnesses and dysfunction. So it's kind of like a job, but at the same time, it's an incredible pleasure and a joy. And by organizing so that we're doing this as a collective, we're able to draw up a vast resource of the awareness coming through all of us at the same time. And that is so magical. That's why I bring up topics. A lot of times I save topics for you guys that I'm looking at and going, ooh, this looks juicy and interesting, but I'm not sure on my own how much I can dig into it. So I'll bring it to the webinar. I'm going to bring it to all of you guys, to all of us together, so that we look at it as a collective. When we do that, oh, exciting stuff comes up, which brings me to the recap of yesterday. And I wanted to, again, look at this point that came up from yesterday. In the last week, speaking of juicy tidbits that come to me, in the last week, I had, in the remote healing sessions, come across a value of the causal body, okay, a value of deep inner intelligence that was fascinating and beautiful and so wonderful. So I described it yesterday. Everybody get a download. Again, everybody new today gets this download so that so we all have a nice, clear, concise sense of the energy frequency of this particular way in which our causal bodies can function in order to provide astounding amount of resource. So when I first came across the energy, I call it the cosmic gardener, because it reminded me of the type of discriminating capabilities required when you're in the garden. Besides that the garden is beautiful and it smells luscious and it's full of light and life force, the gardener has to know like which are weeds and which are not weeds, and what to pull and when to plant and like that. So there's this really deep level of discrimination required. And this form of the causal body was a very, very big form. It was, I think we decided that it was an intergalactic form. So we know that our causal bodies are as big as the whole universe. Essentially, at some level, we can probably identify the causal body with just the whole mother of the universe. But within that context of the wholeness of the universe, there are regions. And within the bigger regions, there's smaller regions and smaller like that. And all the regions have a value, and all of them have a role to play in the healing process. So it's good to be familiar with the whole range of expression of that causal body. And I've talked about how these regions in the causal body are big resonating spaces, right? So what we're doing is we're expanding our awareness out to a very big platform where we're looking at this very large structure of the causal body. And one of the extremely brilliant course participants made the suggestion, what if it's Annapurna? For those of you who are not familiar with the term Annapurna, it means full of food. but this mechanism works at a certain pace, and it was right at the very, very end of the webinar yesterday. And so I wasn't 100% sure. I wanted to check it. I wanted to test it. I wanted to look at it from a bunch of different angles to feel confident with that idea before presenting. But I decided that she was absolutely right. And how brilliant is that? So hats off to our dear Jyotishi friend who had that insight that it could be Annapurna, because yeah, right? Lots of people raising hands. Woohoo! We are so grateful to you, darling, for having come up with that suggestion. So, and being brilliant. Yeah, nourishment. It's nourishment. And like on the mountain, Annapurna is a mountain. And on the mountain grow all the different foods, but also grow like medicinal herbs. You know, all the structures, all the forms of creative intelligence, which provide sustenance and nourish. And that role of the mother of all the plants and all the structures, even all the functions which we utilize to support our evolution and to support our highest health, they're all contained in the concept of that great mountain and the stability of that mountain and the cosmic reality of that mountain, that it's not just something that is like a mountain on earth, but it has a reality in the larger scope of our environmental structure. So what I'm doing is I'm just letting awareness settle down with that gentle intention for everyone to receive the download of the specific energy signature or identifying energy marker that defines Annapurna. And because it's experienced internally from a subjective point of view, it means that we can understand it in terms of ourself, that we all are Annapurna also. We all contain that value. We're full of food sometimes, right? We know that feeling, that full feeling. In this case, the coming of this presence is doing more than just providing access to this vast, vast storehouse of information and knowledge. It's also creating a kind of sacred balance in the system and in the body with regards to our relationship with food. That's really important. And it's really important right now because our food supplies are controlled by large corporate, at least in America. I don't know if it's different in Europe, but in America, I think there are about 5 big suppliers that are responsible for all the food that we purchase in our stores. Unless we get it from our garden, it all comes from, you know, Tyson, or I don't know what all the different names of them are, but there's about 5 of them. And those resources or sources of food, at least in America, well, they don't have our best interests at heart. And so as a result, some imbalanced relationship with food has evolved. There's this really sweet, soft, very loving cultivation of a loving relationship, of a lovingly reverent relationship between the being and Annapurna, but also between the gut, the microbiome, and Annapurna, right there. So this is happening, and I'm feeling the energies. It's unfettered, it's moving, it's circling, especially we get the gut bacteria online there. And what that's doing is it's supporting our, it's interesting, yesterday's webinar also started out with a healing for digestion. Anyway, different one though. And there's a bit of a releasing and letting go, but there's also this lovely, enthusiastic kind of excitement and pleasure that is associated with the birth of this richer relationship with the laws of nature. And I think of this, when I first came across this big being, this big Annapurna being, I thought, wow, it seems to incorporate like all sorts of laws of nature, many, many laws of nature contained within the context of a single sort of expression of self. So it gives access to lots of laws of nature that have to do with the eating process, with the digesting process, with the food selection process, timing, when do we eat, what do we eat, how much do we eat, and then once it goes inside, how do we deal with it? So that whole system is getting an upgrade as a result of the establishment of the relationship. And what this relationship is, and I pointed this out yesterday, is essentially a relationship with our own self. Right? Because all these causal forms, all these Davic forms of creation are actually manifestations of the causal body. It's just that each one of us kind of slices up or divides up that big ocean of the causal self in different ways. So we have different types of resonating spaces that we're used to working with. And this is one that, at least for myself, I hadn't worked with it on this level before ever until this week. So that's why it's such a pleasure to share it with all of you, because this is like new information coming out, at least for me. And as it comes out, it provides a resource for understanding oneself in terms of a multi-galactic structure. Our bodies are this big. I'm this big. but the being is infinite, unbounded, eternal, transcendental. So it can, what we're doing is we're kind of knitting together the continuum between the physical material level of self and that eternal level of self. And so one of the steps in the knitting process, in the integration process, is this ability to reach awareness out and embrace those forms that are really extensive. And this one, it's so sweet. It's so beneficent. It's so good. It's so good. It can be a resource for you. May it be a resource for everyone. One of the things I absolutely loved about the establishment of this relationship that I was going through, because, you know, I did it and then I kind of slowly was working with it for a few days before I got to you guys here, was how it activated my intellect. I enjoy having an intellect that works most of the time like I'd like it to, as I'd like it to, but there were horizons of intellectual functioning that were new to me, that involved the presence of intellect as a force and as a palpable structure, like I could feel it in my body. And that was really, it was really interesting to go through that experience, because once the awareness stretched open to such a big form, and it was possible to say, oh yeah, that's actually one of my big resonating spaces. Then I was just like sitting in samadhi, humming in that big resonating space. And I realized that it made orderly and restructured the way the mind utilizes that tool, the way the mind utilizes the tool of the intellect, and how the intellectual capacity heals the liver, for example, as an example, because there are certain organs in the body, and we just touched on this yesterday, but it's very important for upgrading everybody's healing capacity, which I believe is a title, Expanding Everyone's Healing Potential is the title of today's meeting, by the way, because that's an organ which is responsible for tremendously fine discrimination. Both the kidneys and the liver are very, and also the intestines, right? Also the gut, because we're doing a lot of sorting down there, but our microbiome is doing a lot of the sorting for us in the gut. But in the actual liver and the kidneys, those organs themselves are doing the discriminating and the sorting and the organizing. So just looking into the energy frequency of everyone's livers and kidneys. And as we do that, those organs have their own magnetic field, and they have their own energy intelligence that oversees. So every organ has, you can think of it like a little angel, sort of, if you want to think of it that way. But the idea is that there's a quality of consciousness, pure consciousness, which is responsible. It is the consciousness of the liver. It is the consciousness of the kidneys. So happy to be doing this healing for everybody. So one of the things that's happening is the very sort of vast intellectual capacity is channeling actually through the heart. And through the heart center, it's able to go to the other organs. And as I'm saying this, I'm also looking at few other people have brought in some concerns on other organs. We've got one person that would like to see some healing for sinus cavities and mucus buildup at the springtime, right, when the allergy season is up for a lot of people. And another person brought in a question, a very important question about STDs. And as you know, I get a lot of questions about STDs because, yeah, oh, lots of hands raising there. Yeah, because such a high percentage of adults are actually exposed to the HPV virus and the herpes virus and so forth. So many people are exposed. So, oh, more hands raised. Yeah. So that's one that we absolutely have to, oh, even more hands raised. Oh my goodness. I love you guys. Yeah, it's about time we did some good healings for this stuff, right? It's about time. All right. So let's just make sure that we've gotten a nice completion on the discrimination establishing in the different organs of the body. And what that means is an individual relationship between the organs that we're working with, and that great big overseeing Davic intelligence that we think of. We can now think of that as, by its Vedic name, Annapurna, full of food. Especially for the liver, this is just such an important healing. It's so precious. The liver is undergoing a great upgrade and refinement in its ability to harness the agnis. One of the things that's happening is at the beginning of this, there's like a purification, and it's cleansing fear from the liver. So that cleansing of the fear is going to help the liver feel stable and steady as it's working with the agnis of the body, or that metabolic fire in the body too, which is the instrument which supports the liver's ability to sort through all the nutrient-rich blood and to identify out the different layers of density, which is what one of the things, the many things that the liver does. It does hundreds of functions, but this very important function of sorting out the food in terms of layers of density. 5, right? Space, air, fire, water, and earth. And those 5 connect to the 5 senses. And the Agni is able to follow, the Agni becomes connected to the particles of the food, and it goes to the senses of perception, and it supports at the level of sensory perception as well, which I would say is probably a really important thing to happen in today's webinar. Once again, expanding our healing potential. Having those refined senses of perception is very useful. So that means increased discrimination through the senses of perception as well. Ooh, I love that. And one of the things it's carrying with that Agni is an impulse of pure truth. So the pure truth is following through into the senses of perception. And as it does that, it clears ours, especially our fine inner senses. This is so important, that the inner perception is able to identify the difference between what is me, what is that aspect of myself, which is absolutely useful in this moment to perpetuate me into my next and next and next steps of evolution, and what is present that is not useful. And knowing that when I say what is me, we have to be very clear that ultimately me is divine being, right? And if small me thinks that, oh, this thing that's like self-destructive is like part of my personality or part of my lifestyle or part of whatever, then what that means is big divine me is looking at that, saying to themselves, well, obviously little me needs to understand this area in more detail before eliminating that bad habit or eliminating that behavior which is not evolutionary. But what this healing is doing is it's refining down the senses so that very, very quickly it's easy to discriminate and determine which behaviors, thoughts, impressions, feelings, especially feelings, because feelings are so intimate. You feel like, well, that's got to be me because I'm feeling it. And yes, on some level, yes, divinity is going through some kind of dynamic experience through this instrument, but all these impulses, some of them are more complete than others. We talked about completions and incompletions yesterday also. And it's the complete expressions that are the vehicle to ride to the next higher level of divine expression. It's the complete expressions. The incomplete expressions are present present because they need to be completed. And remember, if there's an incompletion, it's going to have some discomfort associated with it. And when that discomfort is there, that's the signal that attention is required. And it shows you, it reveals where the attention needs to go in order to complete. And the thing is, if we get gripped, if we're as individuals gripped by the concept that, well, this incomplete, nasty, yucky thing that I'm having to deal with, well, that's really me. That's like defining me. Then we're not empowered to deal with it. So it's very important. It's very important to realize that those complete expressions are one's essential self, and the incomplete expressions are part of individuality, which is present in order for divine being and totality to become more manifest in the relative. Okay, that's a lot of talking. Let's get back to some more healing work. I promised we will talk about these other two issues. One is oh boy, all kinds of good stuff coming up. Beautiful questions coming up in the question. It looks like, oh, my dears, if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer box, not in the chat box. Because when it goes in the chat box, I lose it forever when I close the webinar. And sometimes I don't get to everybody's questions on the webinar, and I want to answer all your questions. So please, those of you who have questions specific, stick them in the question and answer box, and then I will do my best to answer them here. And if I can't, I'll shoot you an email, or I'll figure out another way to answer your question. Okay. Herpes. Right, yesterday I was pointing out that every part of the body is an expression of the way in which divinity self interacts. So we've got these marvelous vehicles which allow us to understand divinity from many different perspectives and angles. So like the right side of the body, if you're right-handed, the right side of the body is oriented towards the outward world. The left side is more oriented towards the inner world. The hands and arms and shoulder mechanism, this whole section here, is associated with the way we interact with the relative field of our creation. Whereas, in fact, all the limbs, the head, right, because all the senses of perception are penetrating out into our world, the hands and arms and the legs and feet, all these parts of the body are all the outer parts, even skin, muscles, like that. These are all showing us the stroke of divine creation where it goes from unmanifest to manifest. Whereas all the internal organs are showing us the stroke of divine creation as it goes from the manifest back down to the unmanifest. And this is an important point that came up from yesterday, because one man was asking about, really, he wanted such concise detail. I love this brilliant intellect on this man. Concise detail about how do we identify the seed of the illness, really, and how do we work our way through this cycle of self-healing. And he had outlined, as he understood it from I think he's done like just one webinar or two webinars with me so far. So from what he understood from a couple of webinars, and I was pointing out that the other piece of information that's so important is inference. Because through inference, we really, really understand. We can find inference gives us access to our location within the eternal loop of divinity self-interacting. So that's this ancient, eternal thing. And we're somewhere where whatever the symptom is shows us, whichever part of the body is affected, shows us where we are. Are we on the outward stroke? Are we on the inward stroke? So that's the use of inference. That's the value of inference in energy healing. And it's really important. It's like you're going to go on a journey or go anywhere, you need a roadmap. So that provides the roadmap. And on my knowledge base, there are lots of entries for all different parts of the body. And as we know, that's a work in progress, and it may be for decades, I don't know, but you can find a lot of parts of the body there and illnesses and what that means, their significance, their energy healing significance. Okay, so herpes is an invasive virus. It invades the body. So what that means is it leverages an incompletion feeling that's in the body of being vulnerable or weak or victimized, exploited. It exploits the body. It's like a, yeah, exploitative energy. Exploitative energy. And the herpes virus, and we might even be able to get a little B-roll in here at some point and show people the picture, because if you look at a picture of a herpes virus, it's got this big, thick armor with kind of like these little things sticking out everywhere, like little fists. It's got like little fists sticking out. It's like a circle with like 100 little fists sticking out everywhere. And the outer coating of it's like really, really, if it's this big, the outer coating comprises like that much of it. So there's just a little tiny inner area. If you've got the virus cell is this big, just a little inner area about that big has the DNA in it. It has the center of that cell. Well, in order for our bodies to get rid of the virus, what we need to do is we need to get a sample. Our bodies need a sample of the DNA. Once we have the sample, we are golden. Because once you have the sample of the DNA of a virus, you can, and this goes for any type of virus, any type of infection, you can produce, our bodies naturally, spontaneously, our immune systems produce proteins which kill that virus. They keep that sample like in an archive, and they can produce very specific types of proteins that will eliminate the virus, but they need the DNA sample. And the reason Western medicine says, oh, there's no cure for herpes, you just have to live with it, you can control the symptoms over time, but you can't get rid of it, is because there hasn't been an effective way to penetrate that outer shell and get to the DNA. There are definitely things that help. On the superficial level, just came up with one of, maybe the lady who gave me that is in today's webinar. I don't have my list up right now, but evidently certain types of oregano oil soften the cell walls of the herpes virus, thus making them penetratable, permeable, making them permeable so that we can get in and get our samples. But we can permeate. We can penetrate. We can turn our consciousness, if a virus has an exploitative relationship with us, we can turn our energy around and exploit the virus and find its DNA. Soften up those cell walls and get in, because we can penetrate anything with our consciousness. Consciousness moves through space-time like nothing, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to focus attention on, and even if I'm sure a lot of the people in this session don't have a virus, don't have STD, but anybody, all of us have some viruses in our system at all times. So it's just mostly they're under control. So we're just going to go into the energy, that exploitative energy of the virus. And what I'm going to do is, in my silence, kind of refocusing my attention here, identifying using our improved discrimination, thanks to the download that we just got previously, penetrating the inner soul, the inner core, the nucleus of the viral energy, the heart. In some cases, viruses look like little spidery monsters and things like that. If you've ever looked at them under electron microscope photographs, they're very interesting looking, kind of creepy, but really interesting. Going in, penetrating in with our electron microscope subtle awareness into the heart of the virus, even through that hard armor of the herpes virus, and finding the tender, vulnerable inside, that tender place where the DNA is, where the intelligence of the DNA resides. It's like entering an archive. So we're awareness penetrating into the archive of the viral energy. And what I'm noticing, because we're such a big group and we're all so oriented towards energy healing, that our energy healing group is penetrating its awareness into the collective field, like the microbial reality of our Earth, and we're finding viruses all over the Earth. We're finding all types of viruses, and in all of them, we're penetrating awareness and creating paths so that others can also penetrate awareness. Even animals can sometimes get viruses, although not as much as humans. Animals create vitamin C in their livers, and humans don't. Most. Hedgehogs don't. I think it's hedgehogs. But humans and hedgehogs don't make vitamin C. But everybody else does. We love hedgehogs. They're so cute. Anyway, yeah, so I love you guys. Okay, so we and the hedgehogs must penetrate the vulnerable inner core of the viruses, finding that DNA and taking a record, making a record of it. And that record is actually a code for the structure of the virus, which has a reality at cosmic levels as well, right? That, in other words, there are archives of DNA information in the field of consciousness itself, in the field of the subtle levels of our universe. All the codes for all the DNA, for all the beings, and all the places in the whole universe are contained. So right there. So once we have, that's so interesting. Once we have a sample of the DNA, what's really fascinating to me is that our consciousness wants to go to that universal archive. And what I realize is that's how this, you guys, this is revealing for us right now, due to the blessing of our collective focus. This is how our immune system, our brilliant, mysteriously elegant body, uncovers and eliminates imbalance. How the immune system eliminates. It compares the codes which are extracted from the DNA of the virus, are compared to universal codes. Of course, our cells and our immune system has access to universal information. Of course, our bodies are super wise, right? And our bodies are used to interacting with the rest of the universe like all the time. It's just that sometimes those interactions don't pop to the surface. We're not aware of them. That code, compared to its universal form, from the universal form comes the information, the antidote, because the universal form is like a shape of the code, and then the whole, because it's a universal form, the archive also contains the form on the level of consciousness that complements that original form. So the complement comes in, and the complement is the antidote. It is the protein that kills the virus. And I'm just seeing that transpiring. This is transpiring, that these particular types of proteins, the energy frequency or the code for the proteins, is being received by humanity as a download. And this is for like our whole world. This is us acting as a kind of a collective energy healer for the big collective of the whole world. And those codes are coming and they're being received as downloads. For a lot of people, as the download comes in, they experience an event or happening in their world that gives expression to the incoming information. You know, somebody's talking to them about the stats on some ball player, and it's like a code. It's like information coming in like that, specific numbers and relationships and proportions. I'm just feeling that. It's moving into the, I'm seeing it moving the codes and the download, they're moving into the educational system. The inner the inner educational system and the outer educational system. Looks like very soon, I would say in the younger generation, see, I'm the gray-haired older generation, but in the younger generation, in their generation, very, very easily, there will be no more infections, very easily. And what we're doing is we're supporting that process by running it on the level of consciousness and smoothing out the path by which that information makes its way to the surface. Because as we know, there are ideals and ideas of what might happen or what could happen, but then there's this element of nature's influence, and nature can structure or restructure things. Just like this morning, we had no internet until like a few minutes before this meeting, and I'm like, are we going to have internet today? I don't know. Beautiful. Okay, so going back to that virus, what's beautiful is we transcended or bypassed the hard shell of the herpes virus, and we extracted the DNA information without even having to break the shell. We extracted it as an energetic signature or code. And then that code, by making use of the universal archives of information, we were able to compare and contrast the energy structure of the code with the actual information in the archives, and thus were provided with the antidote. And like I said, evidently, oregano oil is also very good. If you're curious, I think I might have a blog up about that soon, and you can go look at that. Uses and methods of application, consumption. Okay, we want to do a healing for building up mucus in the sinus cavity. So that's the defense mechanism there. The body is reacting with anger and fear to pollens, this is springtime, pollens which are in the air, which are not really an enemy to the body, but are being perceived as such. Pollens, it's interesting, pollens are also, they're part of the reproductive cycle of plants. So it's interesting that we just did a healing for herpes, and now we're looking at an extension of that in the reproductive cycle of plants. What I'm feeling is an impulse from the heart is starting to rise up. So that we can say this resonations at the causal level of the physiology manifest through the body, and that we tend to understand them. We understand them at the heart level. So that's what's happening right now, is that rising of the understanding of this very primordial, very beautiful process that takes place on our earth every spring. It's an ancient, ancient tradition of all the plants flowering, all the plants going into their reproductive cycle. Almost all of them. So the first thing that's happening is through our collective intention, the loving reverence is being offered, and gratitude is being offered to the plant kingdom in order to appreciate what they do at this time of year that supports their ability to perpetuate and maintain their life flow, which of course is the foundation for ours. The next thing is that there are certain pollens. I've looked at those under the electron microscope too. I like those electron microscope pictures. I like to look at Google Earth too. I like to go up, zoom out big and zoom in small and look at it in all its different layers, because it's like our world's like a big fractal, right? And all these different forms reflect each other, and it's just so beautiful and fascinating. But anyway, that's an aside. A lot of pollens actually look very similar to that herpes virus. They're like, they've got a hard shell on the outside, and they've a lot of times just got spikes coming out everywhere. So they're these kind of, they can be these sort of prickly little things that get inside the body and have a sort of irritating effect on the respiratory system. They can. But the respiratory system has to discriminate, it has to understand that even though the physical structure of the pollen might be kind of prickly, it's not an actual danger to the body. What's happening is it's in the heart area where the response is, uh-oh, enemy, alert, red alert, there's an enemy. And that impulse that this prickly thing that's being breathed in is an enemy, is that impulse is based on illusion. It's an illusion that it's an enemy. It's not an enemy. What's really an enemy is one's own anger. At least one is responding to one's own anger as if the anger is an enemy. And so that's the subtler story of what's going on, is that this is the problem with allergies, is a situation where one is still having a little trouble dealing with one's anger. We've talked a lot about anger. I got a bunch of videos up and blogs. You can look at those. But in the meantime, we need to go into this particular specific situation. There's a feeling of vulnerability here, that when the anger comes up, I don't trust myself and I don't feel confident. Yet danger, right, someone's saying danger and anger kind of go together. I don't trust myself enough and I don't feel confident to handle this anger in a graceful and noble and, you know, most useful manner. But it's an ancestral impulse, because it goes back so many generations of people not handling their anger effectively and having it emerge as a destructive effect in our world rather than a constructive effect. So we're going back through the ancestral archives right now. It's opening up, offerings of homage being offered to the ancestors, and particularly the male ancestors. And there's a feeling that I'm getting in here of entitlement, that one of the ways that people have coped with their anger, their own anger, and like justifying it, is they feel entitled. They feel like, well, I have the right to get angry at that person because, and then fill in the blank, fill in the illusory blank. Whereas looking at it, entitlement, and of course what entitlement does is it creates all kinds of social problems with people, all kinds of problems. So entitlement has to go. And so that we're just gently, in the ancestral archive, suggesting that we quarantine out and isolate out. And that's what mucus does, right? It kind of goes around and quarantines whatever the offending substance is, whatever the toxin is, or the pollen or whatever. So we're actually using the nature of the system to create a quarantine, to heal the fact that the system is doing that too much. Kind of like it takes a thorn to remove a thorn, right? So the mucus is that tendency to quarantine around something that we don't want. So what we're needing to do is we need to quarantine around the entitlement. As we're quarantining around the entitlement, we're coming up with the problem that one always offers deference to those at higher levels or higher positions in the dominance hierarchy. And that's good. It's good to be gracious and appropriate at all times. But the whole concept of the dominance hierarchy I'm seeing something. Okay, so You know, I outlined earlier that the different parts of the body, like the limbs and the outer tissues, are expressions of the outward stroke of creation, and the internal organs and the organ systems express the inward stroke of creation. Okay. So we have these organs and systems in our physical bodies, but as pioneers in the field of energy healing, which all of us are, all of us being here doing this together are pioneers, we are now looking at a structure, at you could say an organ or a system that's at a collective level. So our collective world also has organs and systems, and we can use inference to understand what the collective is going through, like what it's grappling with, or, you know, we can use it just as well as a roadmap in our collective healing efforts to heal the collective consciousness of, or the universal field of all humanity, or whatever level we go to, in the same way. So what we're dealing with here is this element of the dominance hierarchy. And the dominance hierarchy is a thing. It's a structure, and it's kind of a necessary structure. It's a kind of natural structure. It's based on the fact that our function as humans is that we evolve. We evolve. So there's this evolutionary process going on. So on one level, we're all just divine being talking to itself. On another level, we are all striking the world. We are all coming into connection with our reality at different levels of development, right? Like some people are really good musicians and other people can't carry a tune. Some people are really good mathematicians and other people, they're not so strong at math, right? I mean, it's natural that there's this diversification. Some people are great bakers, and some people are great politicians and, you know, leaders, whatever. They're all different, all different. Everyone has their place. But wherever we hit that hierarchy is the spot where each person's maximum evolution can be had. So it's a thing, and there are karmas that come along with it. There are karmas that come along with it. You know, just because someone's technically at some higher level doesn't mean that they're happier. Just because they're richer doesn't mean that they're happier, or more powerful doesn't mean that they're happier, right? It doesn't mean even that they're evolving faster, or that if you were rich and powerful, or I were rich and powerful, that we'd necessarily be evolving faster. We need to be in the place where we're evolving maximum capacity. Yeah, okay. Thank you, sweethearts. So many for raising hands, and good, you got that point. All right, so the dominance hierarchy is a thing. It's an organ. It's a collective organ. It's like a kind of scaffolding in our society, right? Okay, here's me. I'm just spitting out my inference process right here. And thanks to all of you with the upgrades for the intellect and discrimination, we're looking at it together. So it's a scaffolding. It provides a diversified field for engagement with one's karma, right? Because wherever you are, whatever your occupation or something, that's where you interface with the web of life, with the collective. The dominance hierarchy has a reality at the astral level of creation, the astral level of being. It has a seed, it has a blueprint, you could say, or a really fundamental energy signature at the causal level. So it's existing in the whole range. I'm looking for, why is it somehow seen as malefic? And if we're doing, as we're doing a healing for allergies, which are based on feelings of danger and fear, and misrecognition, ancestral, yes. How it's ancestrally, it's, I'm finding a little thread that goes back into the ancestors, particularly male ancestors, and we're looking at beliefs and attitudes about the dominance hierarchy. And feelings of entitlement, and also like judgments and even excuses for why, like rather than taking responsibility, personal responsibility for why life isn't going the way we want it to go, it's easy to blame something in the collective, right? Like that's a big organized structure over there, I'll just blame that, right? So the dominance hierarchy can easily become the subject of blame or the excuse for why an individual isn't maybe where they think they would like to be. We're releasing a lot of beliefs and through the ancestral archive, and it's going back many generations. I'm seeing like 20 generations, 24 generations. That's a lot of generations, you guys. About 24 generations, it stops right there, of ancestors letting go of beliefs that the reason one's lot in life isn't better is because of the dominance hierarchy. And that that's something to be afraid of, and something to get angry about, and it's justified, and that element of entitlement. We're hitting into some really deep storylines. There's some deep, going back 24 generations is really a lot of generations. And so we're hitting some really deep storylines, and the storylines are impressions. So we need to clear impressions. And these impressions, the beliefs, the storylines, the impressions, the discordant feelings, all this is clearing from the causal level of the body all the way up to, looks like, mental, emotional, etheric, up to the etheric, even in some cases up to the physical for 24 generations. Yeah, it's clearing through all those layers of the physiology. But the impressions, they anchor in, or they cement in the beliefs, right? You have a belief that the world's a certain way, and then you pick up the information from the world that justifies the belief. And so that kind of helps cement it in. So those are clearing. Underneath that, clearing pain bodies, because there are also attachments, because after all, we really do need to have a vast range of opportunities for people to interface with the field of life. And with that, it feels as if this healing is coming to its completion or resolution. It feels like we're starting to complete right now. You know, when we're working with really large numbers of individuals, like 24 generations of ancestors, for example, then it really, from my perspective, it seems to be more efficient if we don't try to get too elaborate, right? But we just go in and do one thing, 1 or 2, 3 things like that, because it's such a big number that the effect is going to be huge. They're also getting a download for Annapurna. Well, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? I think that's why we did this healing in the first place. I think just so many beings and physiologies on this planet needed to get access to that, because it's such a, I want to say no-brainer, but really it's such a node in the web of creation, that incredible discriminating potential of the Annapurna. It's just beautiful. So that's what the ancestors wanted. They wanted to be nourished too. They want to be nourished too. Everything in creation loves the sweet impulses of consciousness that evolve from a settled, happy, self-contained physiology. They're getting a download also for the mother is at home resonance, or it's kind of an energy tool mechanism, is that deep, safe, secure feeling of mothers at home right there. So that's for everybody. That's for everybody, even the little ones. And boy, especially going back generations, because we know that in past generations, a lot of people, a lot of our ancestors had to grow up kind of fast. So, you know, they had to kind of find for themselves within their own consciousness that feeling of security and capability, and I'm safe and I'm sound, and mother is at home within me, so that whatever is happening with actual parents, it doesn't matter. I can find my safe space. That's so important, and that's a survival tool right there. Okay, I want to look more at these questions. So we've done a healing for the sinuses and the mucus buildup by quarantining that exploitative energy and then creating the healing around it that supports an upliftment for not only ourselves, but 24 generations of ancestors. That's washing away the whole, very foundation for the fear and anger and frustration that is expressed by the immune system at the presence of the pollens in the air. So good job, everybody. Okay, here's one. I wanted more healing and info on eating disorders. I'm plagued by an eating disorder. I eat way too much and the wrong things, anything we can do for that. Especially in the springtime, it's a very nice time to do such a healing because this is a time, this is a kapha time of year, so it's a little bit more heaviness in the body anyway. So I'm looking at this body, and what I'm seeing is that overloading the digestive system is a way of attempting to cope with overload of information. When the mind and awareness and thoughts and feelings, when the inner dweller, the indweller, is having experiences and it feels like too much. I can only cope with like 50% of what's coming at me right now. The rest, the other 50%, is given to the digestive system. So I mentioned earlier how the inner systems and organs of the body represent that inner stroke of divine interaction, and the limbs and outer tissues represent the outer stroke. So the digestive system really breaks that divine process down into step-by-step sequential unfoldment. And for people who experience that they overeat a lot or consistently, I'm seeing a blockage in a chakra in the mouth. So there's a chakra here and there's a chakra here, but there's also, look, a chakra kind of like a sub-chakra right between them, right in the mouth. And the mouth is, you know, on the map, right? We're using inference to see where are we on the map if it's in the mouth. That sub-chakra, the mouth is like a metaphor, or it's a part of our body that represents totality. It represents totality because it ranges all the way from ah at the very back of the throat. Ah, it's a chamber. It's like a wholeness. Our mouths are a wholeness. They're symmetrical. They have symmetry in both directions, at least these two directions, right? And ah starts at the back of the throat, and then ah comes to the front. Ah. So you can go all the way from absolute, infinite, unbounded being expressing itself as totality to the complete collapse, silence, dynamic silence, and let's see, infinite dynamism and infinite silence. The whole range can be expressed in the mouth. So the mouth is this amazing part of our bodies. It is so cosmic. Woo, lots of hands go up. I love you guys. Such an amazing part of the body. More hands going up. Ah, got it. So that's me just going back in my silence, right? We've identified there's something here. So there's an incompletion here, particularly kind of at the back of the mouth where the swallowing mechanism is. There's an incompletion. So there's just a feeling of like, I'm trying to complete you. I'm trying to eat more and more and to complete you. And so what happens is we put in, I asked being, and being came back with the 112-point matrix, which is the matrix that contains every different way to experience, every sacred way to experience wholeness or totality, fulfillment or fullness. Ooh, could Annapurna help us too? I think Annapurna could be very helpful here, right? Okay. So we get a matrix in there in the mouth, so that the mouth is experiencing fulfillment, totality, fullness, and wholeness. And at each point, that the nice thing about matrices, for those who are new, they're also, that word is on my knowledge base, but matrices are sacred geometrical forms comprised of the threads of consciousness that are located at the astral level of reality, that web of life level where consciousness takes on the form of threads or streams or channels of expression. So these threads and channels, they form together to create these sacred geometrical forms, and at every node, at every notch, there's an energetic structure. This matrix has 112 points, and each point represents a different sacred way to transcend. And there is also a blog about that on my knowledge base. You can go read about the dynamic and beautiful, exquisite inner construction of the 112-point matrix as taken from the Shiva Puranas. Enjoy. So the 112-point matrix is there. The Annapurna energy, that form, that aspect of self, it's been the lack of connection to that aspect of self that has been responsible for the feeling of never being enough, never being good enough, never having enough, never being fully equipped or capable to deal with what comes. Now, I know the lady who asked this question, she's extremely sensitive. Like she experiences more in her world. If you're at the restaurant and she's at the restaurant, she is like taking in more information at the restaurant. Like that, I've seen this in you, that you're taking in more information in that place than I'm taking in. And maybe a restaurant isn't a good example. How about a concert? If we're both at the same concert, it's like your senses of perception are less filtered. And so they're actually like taking in more information than the average person. And so the incoming information is a little bit more overwhelming than it would be for other people who are only taking in some information. Here's a great example. I once was reading a scientific research study where they were tracking people's eyes when they looked at other people's faces. And what they found was that the average man looks, in order to identify who he's looking at, like, is that my brother or my mother or my friend or whatever, he looks at about 19 different spots, like, proportions, like how far the eyes are set apart and how far the distance is between the eyebrows and how wide is the mouth and, that kind of thing, like how deep is the chin, those, like about 19. Women look at like over 100 points. Yeah, how about that? Interesting, right? I don't know, maybe it has something to, the researchers had no idea why that was, but they thought that I think perhaps it has to do with the fact that mothers need to identify their children in collectives. When babies are little, they're all cute. They all look basically cute, right? They all have little fat round faces and little noses and, little hands and yeah, but I think it has to do with that tendency for mothers to have a finer degree of identification. And the other thing about that is also in the motherhood process, a mother needs to not just identify her child, but needs to know exactly what the child is feeling. And you know how even a slight little shift in how you're feeling can change the way the muscles around the face structure. Dad's job is to protect, essentially. Dad's out there protecting everyone, making sure they got resources and they're safe. But mom's got to be more like sensitive to how the child is feeling. So it's good for everybody to have that sensitivity. But I think this particular lady has even more sensitivity. So, what we need are healthy boundaries. Because if the senses of perception are in a habit of really sucking in a lot of information, then it's possible that not all the information is necessary. And that's exactly what food is. Food is information. It's cosmic information from the environment that we're taking in and we're processing it physically. So we need to, what is necessary would be to have the sensitivity to pick up exactly those concise pieces of information that you absolutely need and are essential and aligned with fastest evolution, and at the same time, don't pick up extraneous pieces of information that are unnecessary or could be like, you know that saying, too much information? Like, you know, people, you know, sometimes you meet someone and they tell you a lot of personal, private things about them, and you love them and you want to be their friend, but maybe you don't need all those details like that, all the excess detail. It's not that we lose the ability to see detail. The ability remains, but it yokes itself to extracting those specific details that support the evolutionary process, because that's what we're doing. We are becoming divine being. We are becoming perfect, complete, total expressions of divine being. And anything that doesn't help with that is not useful. And if we do need extra detail, oh, we'll get it. No question about it. Okay, so 112-point matrix in the mouth, and then a download for healthy boundaries. And that's for anybody who wants that support on the level of how to make very, very clear, concise decisions about what types of foods and how much and when, because those are the three things we need to look at. So for all three of those. You want plenty of variety, plenty of variety. So don't get caught on just like one or two certain types of foods, right? Okay. Flower power is actually a great source of minerals and vitamins for immune system. All right, so it is. So the oregano, right? Going back to the oregano. Mouth chakra block associated with sleep apnea too. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That's a really, yes.
Were you going to finish somewhere about download?
Oh, discrimination. Yeah, I think we did talk about it some, but yeah, we can do more of that too. And also this question here, the mouth chakra blockage associated with sleep apnea. Such a good thought. Oh, yes. Remember earlier we were saying that specific organs could have a relationship with Annapurna, like your liver can have its own unique specific relationship with Annapurna, your kidneys could, so can the mouth. So I'm moving my attention, focusing my attention on the body elemental for all of us, everybody's body elemental, and I'm asking the body elemental, is it possible we've already kind of established a whole person relationship with that Annapurna energy. Is it possible to take that into a finer dimension of the physiology and establish specific relationship between each organ, or the overseeing intelligence of each organ with Annapurna? Gosh, this really ties into what we were just saying about the lady in her senses getting overwhelmed with information, right? Because the thing about Annapurna is, even though Annapurna is full of food, it's absolutely bursting at the seams with access to resources and nourishment, there's also this incredible discrimination which is applied and is present in every particle of that great form of self. Incredible discrimination. So for all the organs, for all the sensory organs, for all the systems, the nervous system, circulatory system, digestive system, for the mouth itself, for the sinuses. So this is something interesting coming up, and it's reflecting just a little bit back to the healing for allergies that we did earlier. And that is that when discrimination increases at a primordial level of the physiology, our physiologies will spontaneously extract specific types of elements from the environment, kind of like being at the right place at the right time. You know, now if all the air is full of pollens, the thing is, I'm realizing that for people with severe allergies, it's actually possible that their energy field draws in or attracts in more of the pollen from the environment than the person next to them who doesn't have allergies. Because it's the thing, it's like that principle, what you resist persists. That when one is trying to avoid that thing, that what actually ends up happening is creating a condition that attracts it more. And the pollens are so fine, right? That they're able to kind of like conglomerate in some areas more than others. They're just floating around in the environment. So they are able to rearrange themselves. It's like a person who's afraid of dogs, right? You're walking down the road and you see a dog and one person's not, oh, hi, Poochie. You go over and pat the pooch and it's fine. And the next person walking down the street has like a phobia of dogs, and the dog suddenly becomes this vicious monster and starts growling and being horrible to the person. And so I've seen this, it happens. And so it's the same thing, I think, with the pollens, that when that particular energy frequency is in the body, it acts like a magnet and it does draw in more pollens. So it's good that we did the healing to smooth that out, and that now we bring in this, yes, right? Gratitude for the pollen. Somebody's saying that we bring in this more and more delicate, refined integration between ourselves and our bodies, our body elemental and Annapurna. The body elemental can also create its own unique relationship with Annapurna. Also, you can look for body elemental on my knowledge base. And the body elemental's like, yeah, like flocking birds, right? The body elemental's like, I know about Annapurna. I'm down with Annapurna already. Everybody's body elemental is everybody's. I'm just checking into the collective to make sure. I am seeing a pattern. I am seeing the pattern in the collective that people who are dealing with cancer, their body elemental has a weaker relationship with Annapurna. How about that? So for those individuals and anybody else, also other types of like chronic diseases of various types, different types. I'm looking into the wider collective. So we're going right in there and we're addressing for everyone to whatever degree is necessary, that relationship between the body elemental and the great cosmic humming resonance in the causal body, which we call Annapurna, that relationship is sweet. It's an intimate, profound, loving, frictionless communication relationship. And as that's happening, I'm feeling a beautiful opening in the whole abdominal area, like really from like here, from the immune system all the way down into the belly area. There's a really nice opening. It's like being in a love relationship that's really functional. You can be vulnerable and you can trust that if you're vulnerable, that you will still be safe. So that's that relationship. That's what's establishing in that relationship. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I'm feeling waves going up and down the spine. There's something happening between the gut bacteria, the microbiome, and the nervous system that's also an increasing not only communication, but increasing functionality in the relationship between the microbiome and the nervous system. So what that inference, everybody, what that tells us is that the relationship between our nervous systems and our microbiomes is like a fractaline type of reflection of the relationship between our individuality and our body elemental. There's a similarity. There's like a mirror type of image, only one's on a really large scale and one's on a smaller scale. But by healing the one, the other one also heals. Well, that's good, because as we know, there is an intimate relationship between cancer and digestion. And I'm hoping, a note to my dear husband who's doing behind the scenes, if we can include the documentary on cancer that I just watched. It was incredibly inspiring, from a dear friend in England, sent that. And boy, I'll tell you, you'll never be afraid of cancer again. You will never be afraid of cancer again after you watch that movie. It was a wonderful movie. So, okay. She's saying a flock of birds and a school of fish. Some of us are also extra empathetic and experiencing or reflecting issues from others. You betcha. And so we're at our time, but I wanted to make one comment for this incredible woman, this very powerful spiritual woman in California who just made that comment. I realize that it seems that when we're talking about issues that are challenges, that we're essentially recycling them unless when we speak out the nature of the challenge, we include the transformation, the evolutionary transformation that comes from it and what we learned. And I think that if we can vocalize those aspects of those really dramatic, really dynamic, like crazy situations that we run into from time, and everybody does from time to time. Like we didn't have internet this morning. Oh, anyway, so those types of situations that if we can bring them out, but then also show the transformation and what was learned from it, that absolutely causes the expression of that. This is answering a question from yesterday. It causes the expression itself to be an integral part of the healing process. And it helps other people too. So that's on kind of a superficial level, but I do appreciate your question. I appreciate everybody's questions and comments. Bless you all. This has been really fun to bring this weekend's, oh, thank you. Thank you so much, to bring this weekend's webinar home today with lots of healing work for everybody. I'm really glad, I'm grateful for your questions and the chance to kind of address some of these issues that are facing people. Yeah, so important, right? Like we need to do this more, and we need to continue helping our whole world rise into a level of capability and functionality. Thank you, darlings. Thank you, all the raised hands, many raised hands. So I am infinitely grateful. I am deeply grateful for everyone's presence here. I hope everyone got some great healing experiences out of this. We will send recordings of this session to everyone with some links, because there's all kinds of good stuff in there for everybody. And I love you dearly. We'll see you again in 3 weeks.